Now we're going to welcome to you Philip Colligan, who's the Executive Director of Nesta, particularly of the Public Service Lab at Nesta in the UK, which is a foundation encouraging innovation in many ways and supporting innovation in many ways across the UK. Philip will tell you more, but he's also the UK government's official advisor on social innovation. So Philip's going to tell us a little bit more about social innovation in the UK, what that means, what his role is, and where some of the opportunities there are, I think, for social innovation in the UK context. Is that okay, Philip? Philip's also just got off a flight, so thank you, Philip.
Thank you, Louise. And thanks to Ada for inviting me. My first trip to Hong Kong. And so far I've seen a taxi. So I'm hoping, and 2 hotels. It's a very impressive gathering, and I'm very pleased to be here. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. Let me tell you a little bit about me first. So the first part of my career was in government. I was in Whitehall, working in the Home Office, and I went on a 6-month loan to local government in North London and stayed there for 7 years. I was Assistant Chief Exec of a place called Camden, and I was responsible for housing for a long time and regeneration there. And 3 years ago I joined this thing called Nesta. I joined this thing called Nesta. And kind of as Louise said, it's sort of come full circle in the last 6 months, because I'm now have a role back in government again. I spend part of my time as a government advisor supporting the government's work on social innovation in the UK, and I'll say a little bit about that. Let me just say a few words about Nesta. So we're the UK's innovation foundation. Up until last year, we were actually a part of government, and last year we became an independent foundation. We are fortunate in that we were given some money from the UK's National Lottery about 15 years ago. We have an endowment, and that gives us independent finance, modest independent finances, which fund our work. And our mission is wonderful and broad. It is to support innovation. We describe it as helping to bring great ideas to life. And we do that by using 4 capabilities that we've developed. And one of those is money. So we are an investor. We take commercial and impact investments in companies. We also give grants. We are not the biggest grant giver in the UK, and our grants are pretty modest, but we try to get money into the hands of innovators, particularly social innovators. We do research. So we have a think tank in-house, and some of you may have seen some of the reports that we've published, which are not just about the UK anymore. Increasingly we're publishing reports on innovation around the world. And a big part of our focus, increasing part of our focus, is around innovation skills. How do you make innovation happen? And in particular, how, if you're a social innovator with an idea, do you turn that idea into something which could then become a thing that changes the world? We're also looking at how governments innovate, and doing quite a bit of work with governments around the world on that. And finally, networks and events, and it's a big part of our role at Nesta. We have an amazing program of events all year round. The thing I run is called the Innovation Lab now. We just changed its name recently. No, it's all right, nobody knows. I don't think we've even changed it on the website yet. And we are the bit of Nesta that gets behind and alongside people who are innovating in and around public services, in civil society, in the creative economy, in digital companies. And we like to say we give them a little bit of money, a lot of challenge and some love to help them get their ideas to have impact. And I'll say a bit about that in a minute. Just want to pause though to say Nesta was one of the original backers of 6. So we're very pleased with the progress. We're very happy with the development of nodes, I believe they're called, around the world. And we're helping Louise and the team as 6 becomes an independent organisation. I think it's really important that 6 is about you, right? So don't think 6 is some other thing that somebody else does. I've been to a few events, and really the value comes when the people in the room get involved and build connections and stay in touch and so on. It's a fledgling movement, this social innovation movement. And lots of fledgling movements don't become anything other than that. So you have quite a big responsibility to turn it beyond something that's a fledgling movement into something significant. So Ada asked me to talk about some key challenges for social innovation in the UK context. What I'm actually going to do is 4 things. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the context, economic and social. I'm going to set out a few of the key areas of activity, some of the themes, and a bit about our work at Nesta. I'll highlight some of those challenges, and I'll suggest some of the things we might need to do to address them. I'm going to be brief. I don't have slides. I didn't even have time to write slides. Because I think actually it'd be more fun to have a discussion, right? And I think we're going to have a discussion. So context. Okay, so the UK has an economic crisis. Anybody not know that? We now have the worst economic period in modern history. There are lots of charts I could show you if I did slides, but it's pretty grim. And it's not getting any better anytime soon. Some parts of the UK, like London, seem pretty insulated. Out in Cambridge, doesn't feel like there's a recession happening in Cambridge, but actually you don't have to go far outside of those centres of economic activity to find some really tough circumstances for people. And the government has decided, and I'm not making a political statement at all, they have decided to pursue an austerity programme. So they've taken a significant amount of money out of public expenditure in order to balance the deficit. There's a big argument about whether that's the right plan or not. But basically, one consequence of that is major reductions in public spending, major reduction in money to non-profits and charities. You need to kind of set that on one side and remember that notwithstanding the financial crisis, notwithstanding the austerity, the demands on public services are rising so fast in the UK, and I'm sure in Asia too, that the model that we have for public services is unsustainable. The ageing society, long-term health conditions, issues around inequality. It's a pretty tough context for innovating, but I guess the punchline is that people get that we need new answers. So when I started this job 3 years ago, people were like, innovation, that's a bit weird, what do you do that for? And now I am inundated with requests from public service leaders who want us to go and help them because they recognise that cutting budgets isn't going to solve the problem. Just one other point on the context really, and that is that our public services are still basically the same as they were when our grandparents set them up after the war. So they're paternalistic, they do things to people, they assume that people are needy and don't have any assets, and because of that, they don't engage people's assets and capabilities, they don't solve the problems they set out to solve, and actually they breed dependence. And that's a more fundamental problem even than the financial crisis. One other little bit of context which I've been testing out on people, so tell me if you think this is true. I don't think public services know what the internet is for yet. So if you think about retail, you think about holidays, you think about knowledge management, the internet has transformed all of those fields. It hasn't transformed any public services yet. Anyway, that's my other bits of context. So the context is, take all that together, and social innovation is incredibly fashionable in the UK. It's good to be fashionable, but it's not enough, and we'll come back to whether that's a strength or not. So what's happening, what key themes do I find that are interesting? And this isn't comprehensive, it's just my views. Young people are really interested in the idea of social innovation. It is amazing. I haven't got the numbers to hand, but if you look at the surveys of what people who are coming out of business schools in the UK want to do, they want to be social entrepreneurs. See, all the physicists want to be bankers, interestingly, but all the business graduates want to be social entrepreneurs. There's a real momentum behind open innovation models and methods. People are running challenge prizes. People are using crowdsourcing methods to get ideas from different sources. Co-production, I don't know if you use that word here, but the idea of social action, the idea that citizens play a more central role in public services is really gathering traction. It's not a new idea, but we're starting to see signs that it's being taken more seriously. We've run a programme over the last couple of years called People-Powered Health, which is about how can we organise health services differently so that people are more actively involved in the management of their own healthcare, but also in other people's healthcare. We tested a whole load of different solutions, new ways of doing things in 6 areas across the UK. And when we started that programme, we couldn't get the National Health Service involved at all. They were very polite, but they said they weren't really interested. And now that it looks like they're about to appoint a director of People-Powered Health, it looks like they're about to take the programme and roll it out nationally. It's a massive change in just 2 years. The UK has got, and I've talked to a few of you about this already, a relatively strong set of assets and institutions that support social innovation. I was struck this morning, actually, in your presentations that so have you, right? So we're not unique in this. But we've got a lot of foundations like Nesta and Limited, Big Lottery Fund, who are dedicated to supporting social innovation. We have social design and digital agencies, organisations like the Young Foundation that pioneered this work, not just in the UK but around the world. And organisations that are focused on social finance and social ventures, what are called intermediaries. And I'll say some more about those later. What's interesting is when you look across the landscape, there are a lot of organisations that have been set up with the mission to back social innovators. And the government's getting involved too. I mean, the government, this is all being videoed, right? I can edit because I'm not. So the government had this vision for the big society. And this is a very personal thing for the Prime Minister, and it hasn't gone terribly well politically as a message. But they have done some things which have been really supportive of social innovators and that concept of the big society. So we have big society capital. I think the world's first social investment wholesale institution with £600 million of funding. There was a G8 session earlier this week in the UK, the first G8 session ever on social investment, hosted by the UK. They passed a piece of legislation called the Social Value Act, which so far hasn't really had much traction, but has great potential. It allows public services, when procuring, when buying services, to think not just about financial considerations, but also to think about social value. That's significant potential. And then finally, on other things that I think are interesting, we're starting to see partnerships between government, civil society organisations and business. And I think this is a theme I'm going to come back to at the end. It's hugely important. The government launched a social incubator fund last year, which was looking for people who would create new social incubators. So these are institutions that would provide physical space, small amounts of finance and lots of practical support to social innovators who are at the earliest stage. We've partnered on one called Bethnal Green Ventures, and that's a partnership between Nesta, the Nominet Trust, the government and Google. Another one was launched by Unlimited, which is a partnership with Telefonica. And what we're seeing time and again is actually mechanisms like that are bringing commercial organisations in, not through their CSR arms, but through their business arms. And increasingly they're looking at it as part of a social venturing strategy. So some challenges, and there are quite a lot, so I had to work hard to crunch this down to just a few. Basically, there's lots of promise, there's lots of activity, there is a lack of rigour. That's not a popular thing to say when you're in the UK, but it comes back to that point about being fashionable. It's very fashionable to talk about social innovation. Actually, most people aren't putting the rigour in place. It's an emerging field, and there's just not enough in terms of experience, orchestrated knowledge, or shared learning. We're not building on each other's experiences enough. I'll give you a couple of examples. Lots of local councils across England have in the past 2 years launched social innovation funds. What they did is cut grants to non-profit, their grant programs to charities, and replace them with much smaller social innovation funds. And all they really did was make a more complicated process for allocating smaller amounts of money to exactly the same people. And you know, we've got to be careful because that could damage the brand of social innovation. And they don't like it when I go to them as a former person from a local authority and say, sorry, that's not a social innovation fund. We ran a thing called the Giving Fund for the government, which was about finding innovations that help people give their time, their money, their resources to causes that they care about. And in the first round, like 400 people applied, and we backed about 30 or something like that. When we went out with the second round, instead of asking the question, how are you innovative, we changed it to, how are you learning from other innovations that came before you? Because in the first round, people came to us with ideas that have been around for decades, claiming they'd just made them up. And we said to them, well, you didn't invent time banking. That was invented 25 years ago in America. I can introduce you to the guy that came up with it. And they were like, no, we've definitely come up with it recently in East London. It's a really important point that we have to get people to go back and think about what lessons they can take from what's happened before. And building that into our processes as those are the people who support social innovators is really important. So the first one, lots of promise, lots of activity, not enough rigour. The second one, risk of being focused on the early stage of social innovation, generating ideas, and on the later stage of social innovation, so having lots of social capital and social investment available to fund at large scale, but who's tending to that stuff in the middle? So my worry, many things keep me awake at night, mostly my children, but one of the things that keeps me awake at night about my job is I will finish my time at Nesta with hundreds and hundreds of prototypes that never got beyond the prototype. And what I really want is to figure out how we build the institutions, the finance, the support that get the best ideas beyond prototype to that stage where they've got their first paying customers, where they've got a credible business model, where they start to build a management team who is interested in scaling the idea, not inventing their next idea, and that's really tough for social innovators. You know, we want them to become viable businesses. That often means it's not the same people who invented them that are going to get them there. Third challenge, I promise I'll stop in a minute. Inside and outside the system. It's another one that I wrestle with constantly. I've been in public service systems. Who here has worked in a public service or works in one now? Was it easy? Is it easy to innovate? It's really hard. It's just hard. And it's not because people are evil. It's just because the incentives and the structures and the cultures mitigate against it. If you're outside the system, it's kind of easy to be creative, but it's almost impossible to get any traction. I had this insight about 18 months ago. I was discussing with the government our work on social care. This is how we support people to age well. And they were planning this major reform of the care system. And they said, but you know, nothing that we're going to do is really going to solve the longer term problems. It's just going to sort out the medium term financial problems. And I said, but we've got all these innovations we've been backing with your money that point to a world in which a more networked approach to care massively alleviates the pressure on the formal systems. So this is enabling people to live longer, better lives in their homes where they want to because their neighbours and families are better connected around supporting them. And the problem is, of course, that the people who know about those innovations are never in the room when the policy and finance discussions are being had about the system. So this is why I've become obsessed about this idea of hybrid structures, ways of merging the social innovation world with the policy and government world. And that's kind of why I took on the role that I have, working with government as well as being at Nesta. And we've set up a thing called the Centre for Social Action, which over the next 2 years is going to test this out in practice. So it's a joint team between Nesta and the Cabinet Office. We've pooled some resources. We have £40 million to invest in innovations. And we're going to try this out. But when you're thinking about the structures of how do you support social innovation from the government, I think the challenge is how do you make that hybrid structure. So I'm going to end with some ideas on actions. We need to bring much more rigour to the skills and processes for generating and testing and growing social innovations. We need to understand our methods. We need to be more challenging about what works. And we need to spread effective practices. We're having a go at that. We launched a thing called the Open Workshop, which shares everything we know on our website, but we think there needs to be more effort like that. We're working with Rockefeller at the moment on coming up with a sort of synthesized toolkit. We're not inventing a new one, we're using the ones that are already out there, which we're going to give free to the world. We need to be much more honest about the evidence of impact, and that doesn't mean strangling innovations at their earliest stages, but being clear about the difference we want to make and being honest about whether those innovations are going to do. And that's going to help us get from lots of prototypes to some things that have impact at real scale. We need, and I've had a few conversations with people here already about this, we need to join up those institutions and assets so that we're thinking about the life cycle from defining problems through to changing systems and what type of interventions and structures and institutions and resources do we need. We need not to be competing at one end of the spectrum, everyone's setting up social investment vehicles so they can make their money back. You know, we need to think carefully about the roles of governments and foundations and so on, joining it all. I've already said about hybrid models of working with the system, outside the system, and being conscious about that. And finally, I'll come back to that point about creating partnerships between civil society organisations, governments, and businesses. We've made some progress in the UK. Nowhere near enough. I think they're further ahead in America, actually, but there's much more opportunity. If you just think of those innovations we backed around giving, if I had to pinpoint the single problem that runs throughout all of them, the good ones, they don't have access to an audience. So lots of them are websites, and they're kind of about people sharing their time or giving small amounts of money to causes they care about. What they need to do is access hundreds of thousands of people. They need to have an audience. And what big brands have, what they build, is an audience. And what they often lack is things to give them to do. And you find a way just to match those things up. It's very powerful. So anyway, those are my random thoughts. I hope that's useful.